we will win as it is. We are not able to change anything from what had been before.
For centuries, a group of monks in the Ethiopian highlands have been sitting on a version of Christian history that was deliberately taken out and replaced with something easier to control. The monks who live there are not interested in being found. For centuries, their only purpose was preservation, and they carried that purpose in silence the way other men carry names. They protected what was given to them, and they asked nothing in return. One of those monks broke that silence before he died. He was elderly, the kind of man whose entire life had been reduced to a single room, a single practice, and a single body of text that he had spent 6 decades studying. The manuscripts he worked with had never been photographed. They had never been translated into any Western language. They had survived insect damage, military invasions, and the collapse of surrounding empires because generations of men exactly like him had treated their protection as the only task worth a human life. He had taken an oath when he entered the Brotherhood. Almost every man in his position honored that oath until burial. He did not. What he described in his final days was not oral tradition or inherited story. He was referencing specific written text, pages, recorded words attributed to Jesus during the 40 days between his resurrection and ascension, words absent from every Western Bible, never acknowledged by Rome, and never referenced in any mainstream denomination. The document he was describing is called the Mashafa Kedan, translated from ancient Ge'ez as the Book of the Covenant, and according to him, it contained a version of events that the rest of the Christian world was deliberately never meant to access. Understanding why that matters starts with what Ethiopia actually preserved. When the Council of Nicaea standardized the Western biblical canon at 66 books in 325 AD, Ethiopia's Orthodox Church kept 81. The removed texts were not fringe writings. They were foundational documents used by the earliest Christian communities, including the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and the Mashafa Kedan itself. They were not cut because scholars found them unreliable. They were cut because the theology inside them left no room for institutional control. Ethiopia never accepted that decision, and the monks copied those texts by hand across generation after generation, storing them in mountain monasteries and treating them as the most protected material on earth. The age of what they preserved is confirmed. The Garima Gospels, recovered from inside an Ethiopian monastery, were radiocarbon dated and verified to have been written between 330 and 650 AD, making them the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts ever found on the planet. While knowledge was being lost everywhere else, Ethiopia was sealing it behind stone walls and goatskin bindings. The monk who spoke before he died had spent his entire life inside that tradition. He understood the weight of what he was carrying, and in the end, he decided that weight belonged to the world. What Jesus actually said. The Gospel of Luke gives the 40 days after the resurrection less space than most readers realize. Jesus appears, blesses his disciples, and ascends. The entire period is compressed into a few verses, and for 2,000 years, no one in the Western Church was given a reason to ask why 40 days of post-resurrection teaching from Jesus himself was handled in a paragraph. The Mashafa Kedan does not compress them, it records them in full. According to this text, the risen Jesus gathered his disciples with urgency, not to comfort them, but to brief them on what was coming. The first thing he addressed was the world they were about to be left in. He described the material world as a system constructed by a deceptive force designed specifically to keep human beings spiritually blind through the accumulation of wealth, status, and power. He told them that the greatest threat to everything he had taught them would not arrive from outside his movement. It would grow from within it. He said it directly: "Do not build temples of stone, for the stone will crumble. Build the temple of the heart, for it is eternal." In the Mashafa Kedan, that is not a metaphor. It is a command with a specific target. He described men who would wear long robes, invoke his name, and accumulate gold. He warned about a future empire that would take his cross and convert it into a weapon. These passages do not sound like prophecy. They sound like a description of events already witnessed by the person writing them down. He then described the human condition using a framework that bears no resemblance to the theology Western Christianity eventually built its institutions around. He said every human being carries two forces simultaneously. He called them the wind of life and the wind of error. The wind of error was not simply temptation. He described it as something with specific entry points. It enters through greed. It enters through the eyes. It enters through the mouth when a person speaks what they know to be false. Once established, he said, it does not corrupt gradually. It calcifies the heart and turns a living person into what he called a walking tomb. Someone who functions externally in every way, while their interior life has already gone cold. He was not describing obviously broken people. He was describing a condition he believed was already widespread among those who considered themselves faithful. The antidote he offered was not ritual or sacrament. He called it gnosis, direct internal knowledge of truth, and he told his disciples to observe their own thoughts the way a guard watches a city gate, noting what enters and exits without attachment. Then he said the line that the monks who protected this text understood would dismantle the entire structure of organized religion if it circulated freely. He told them the kingdom of heaven is hidden inside the human body, located in the silence between thoughts, and that no building and no priest could bring a person closer to it than their own interior stillness already could. If that teaching had moved freely through the Roman Empire, there would have been no theological justification for tithing, no fear of excommunication to enforce compliance, and no need for an institution to stand between a person and God. The monks who sealed this text in those highland monasteries were not being secretive out of habit. They understood exactly what they were sitting on. The text that knew too much. The Mashafa Kedan contains something that sits entirely outside its theological content, and it is the part that academic researchers have had the hardest time addressing publicly. Scattered across the text are descriptions of the physical world that were dismissed for centuries as ancient poetic language until modern science began confirming them one by one. The manuscript was not revised or updated at any point across its centuries of preservation. What was written stayed exactly as it was written, which means these physical descriptions were not retrofitted to match later discoveries. They were already there, sitting inside a guarded monastery, waiting for the science to arrive. The text describes wind moving through structured gates and following fixed courses across the face of the earth. For most of recorded history, that was categorized as mythology. Modern atmospheric science now identifies global weather systems traveling through what meteorologists call atmospheric rivers, defined high-altitude channels of wind that carry moisture across entire continents along fixed, invisible pathways. The description in the Mashafa Kedan and the findings of 20th century satellite imaging are describing the same phenomenon in different vocabularies. Then there is the water. The text refers to a vast reservoir hidden deep beneath the Earth's surface, locked inside the rock far below anything human beings had ever reached. In 2014, scientists confirmed the discovery of a massive body of water trapped inside ringwoodite deep within the Earth's mantle, holding more water than every ocean on the planet's surface combined. A 2,000-year-old Ethiopian manuscript had already named it. These are not vague correlations requiring generous interpretation. They are specific physical claims confirmed by independent scientific disciplines working from completely separate evidence. The text also records a contemplative discipline that Jesus passed to his inner circle, involving deliberate breath control and the focused direction of thought and attention. The practice, as described, carries structural similarities to advanced meditative traditions documented independently across India and Tibet. This connects directly to the 18 years of Jesus' life that the Western Gospels never account for. Between age 12, when he last appears teaching in the temple in Jerusalem, and age 30, when his public ministry begins, there is no biblical record of his location or activity. Ancient accounts from India and Tibet reference a foreign teacher who studied in their monasteries during that same approximate window. The Mashafa Kedan carries the fingerprints of that education at a structural level that suggests direct experience rather than borrowed knowledge. The deadly object of guardians. In the ancient city of Axum in northern Ethiopia, there is a small chapel that no outside person is permitted to enter. One man is chosen as its guardian. He walks in, and he does not leave again for the remainder of his life. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church states without qualification that this chapel houses the Ark of the Covenant, and they have maintained that claim for 3,000 years without revision. The account of its arrival begins with the Queen of Sheba traveling to Jerusalem, entering a relationship with King Solomon, and returning to Ethiopia, carrying his son, Menelik I. When a grown Menelik later visited Jerusalem, Solomon offered him the throne of Israel. Menelik refused. According to the Kebra Nagast, Ethiopia's royal chronicle, he and his companions replaced the Ark inside the Holy of Holies with a replica and carried the original south into Africa. What cannot be dismissed are the guardians themselves. Observers who have documented these men across different generations have recorded a consistent pattern. They develop cataracts, their skin changes, their eyesight deteriorates progressively from the point of appointment. They die younger than the monks living around them, and they die in physical decline that does not match the profile of men living quiet, low-stress, contemplative lives. That specific combination of symptoms maps directly onto prolonged exposure to ionizing radiation. If the Ark is simply a decorated wooden box, none of that has any explanation. Ethiopia's insistence on this claim has never softened under outside pressure, and outside pressure has come from every direction. Archaeologists, colonial governments, and foreign religious institutions have each at different points attempted to investigate, discredit, or absorb the Ethiopian account. None of them succeeded. The Knights Templar traveled to Ethiopia in the 12th century, specifically searching for it. Their carved symbols remain inside the stone churches of Lalibela, left by men who arrived looking for the most powerful object in the ancient world and left without it. When Italy invaded Ethiopia with modern weapons in 1896 at the Battle of Adwa, they were defeated by a force that had no business stopping them on paper. Ethiopian accounts describe a light on the battlefield that could not be explained. Military historians record it as one of the most unexpected results in the history of African warfare. Ethiopia has never felt the need to reconcile those two descriptions for anyone else's satisfaction, and Ethiopia alone among all African nations was never colonized. The impossible churches. In the 12th century, King Lalibela carved 11 churches downward into solid volcanic rock, not built, carved. Entire cathedrals subtracted from a single continuous mass of stone, complete with columns, windows, vaulted ceilings, and drainage systems that have kept the interiors dry through 800 years of flooding. Every cut had to be correct the first time. Volcanic rock does not allow structural correction after the fact. Modern engineers who have studied the site have concluded that carving all 11 structures with 12th century hand tools would have required approximately 40,000 skilled workers laboring for well over a century. The project is historically attributed to a 24-year window. Beyond the timeline, millions of tons of excavated volcanic rock are simply not at the site. No debris field exists, no dump site has ever been identified. The material that had to be removed to create these structures has no recorded destination. The ancient Ethiopian accounts say human workers carved during daylight. At night, other beings continued the work at twice the speed, using what the records describe as tools of light that passed through solid rock without friction. The priests who maintain this account do not present it as allegory. They present it as institutional memory. In the 12th century, tools of light was the only language available to describe directed energy. That technology now exists in industrial form, and the gap between those two descriptions is one of vocabulary, not physics. Passages within the Mashafa Kedan describe the movement of physical matter using precisely directed sound frequencies, a process acoustic physicists now call acoustic levitation, a documented phenomenon in which sound waves at specific frequencies can suspend and reposition solid objects without contact. If that capability existed in functional form in Ethiopia during Lalibela's construction period, the churches are not a mystery. They are a record of what that technology produced. Beneath the entire complex runs a network of tunnels in complete darkness. Monks in training navigate them alone, without light, by touch and sound. In 2024, laser scans of the site revealed sealed chambers beneath the floors that have not been opened in 8 centuries. The priests confirmed their existence and refused access. Whatever is inside has sat undisturbed since the 12th century, and the people responsible for it have no intention of opening it for outside review. Why it's coming out now. For nearly 2,000 years, these texts sat in mountain monasteries wrapped in goatskin, copied by hand, guarded by men under lifelong oaths. They survived invasions, regime changes, and the slow erasure that took everything else. The monks were not maintaining a library. They were maintaining a seal, and that seal held until very recently. Within the span of just a few years, unauthorized translations began appearing. The content spread through networks that did not exist a decade earlier, reaching millions of people who had never heard of the Mashafa Kedan, the Kebra Nagast, or the Garima Gospels. The speed of that spread is not accidental, and the Ethiopian texts themselves offer the most unsettling explanation for it. The Mashafa Kedan describes the end times using language recorded in ancient Ge'ez that translates into something worth sitting with carefully. It describes a coming age of constructed realities, a world hyper-connected but fundamentally false, where people communicate without physical voices and perceive without physical eyes. A world built entirely from signal with no stable truth underneath it. That description was written 2,000 years ago. Read it against the present moment, and the correspondence is not comfortable. The theory that certain Ethiopian scholars have held privately for decades is this. The monks were not simply preserving scripture. They were holding an emergency record, a set of instructions designed to be released at a specific threshold in human history, and the trigger condition was precisely the world we are currently living in. Trust in governments has collapsed. Trust in media has collapsed. Institutional religion is losing people at a rate that has no modern precedent. What people are looking for, even if they cannot name it clearly, is direct access to something real that does not require an institution standing between them and it. That is exactly what these texts offer, and that is exactly why they move the way they do when people encounter them. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD did not simply organize the scriptures for a broader audience. According to the logic embedded in the Ethiopian canon, it performed a targeted removal. The books that were cut were not cut for being historically unreliable. They were cut because they described human beings as spiritually autonomous, carrying direct access to God within themselves, requiring no intermediary and fearing no institutional authority. Removing those books removed the reader's understanding of their own capacity. Ethiopia kept the full record, while the rest of the world received the edited version, and an elderly monk in the Ethiopian highlands decided before he died that the edited version had gone unchallenged long enough. The monks of Ethiopia have a saying that has been passed down through their brotherhood for as long as anyone can trace. The monk who spoke before he died was not making a theological argument. He was not trying to start a movement or challenge an institution. He was an old man at the end of a long life who had read the same pages thousands of times and decided that keeping them sealed any longer was the greater betrayal. That decision, made quietly in a highland monastery, is the reason this story exists at all.